Some songs make you wait for the chorus before you know what they are. These 10 do not. The first sound lands, and your brain is already there. A car radio, a bedroom turntable, a summer night, a concert you never forgot. That is what makes a great opening so powerful. It is not just an introduction, it is a musical fingerprint. And in the 1970s, when rock, soul, funk, and progressive music were all pushing in different directions at once, some of those fingerprints became impossible to mistake. A backward piano, a clipped guitar groove, a home organ made to sound like a machine from the future, a riff that would eventually be tied to a real fire beside a Swiss lake. Today we are counting down 10 songs from the 70s that many listeners can recognize before the singer has even had a chance to enter. This is not a list of the decade's biggest sellers. It is not a ranking of the 10 greatest songs ever made. It is about something more instinctive, how a few seconds of sound can unlock an entire memory before your conscious mind catches up. And number 1 may be one of the most famous opening riffs ever put on record. Let's begin. Number 10, Roundabout by Yes. The first surprise is that the sound most people associate with the beginning of Roundabout is not actually the first sound on the record. Before Steve Howe's acoustic guitar arrives, there is a strange swelling chord that seems to inhale backward. That effect came from keyboardist Rick Wakeman. When Yes were recording the track with engineer and co-producer Eddie Offord, the band felt that Howe's dry acoustic entrance needed something to draw the listener in. Wakeman suggested a backward piano. Today, creating that effect would take seconds on a computer. In 1971, Offord had to work directly with tape. He marked the exact point where Howe's first guitar note began, flipped the tape, and guided Wakeman so the reverse piano chord would bloom directly into the acoustic introduction. Then Howe takes over, the harmonics ring out, the guitar moves through that intricate pattern, and before the full band has played a note, the song already feels unmistakably like Yes. The title came from a much more ordinary source. John Anderson and Steve Howe were traveling through Scotland while touring, and the roads, roundabouts, lakes, and mountains around them fed directly into the song they were building. That contrast is part of what makes the opening so memorable. The music feels almost ceremonial, as if something enormous is about to happen. But part of the inspiration came from two musicians looking out of a vehicle as they moved from one show to another, and the arrangement deliberately makes you wait. The acoustic guitar does not rush toward the band. It creates tension first, a few exposed notes, space between them, then the rest of Yes arrives, and the track opens into something much larger. More than 50 years later, those first seconds still do the same job. Before John Anderson sings, before Chris Squire's bass takes over the room, before the composition reveals how complex it really is, that opening has already told you exactly where you are. And the next song is even stranger, because its famous opening existed for years before the finished song did. Number 9, Long Train Runnin' by the Doobie Brothers. Long Train Runnin' spent years not being a song at all. Before it became a hit in 1973, Tom Johnston and the Doobie Brothers used the core idea as a live jam. There were no fixed lyrics, there was no carefully planned story. Johnston has said the band played it before they were even signed to Warner Brothers. He would improvise different words from night to night while the musicians stretched the groove on stage. To him, it was simply something the band played. Producer Ted Templeman heard something more. While the Doobie Brothers were making The Captain and Me, Templeman told Johnston that the jam ought to become a real song. Johnston was surprised. It had never occurred to him that the piece needed to become anything more than a live workout. Templeman said the music reminded him of a train and suggested writing around that idea. Johnston went into another room, wrote the lyrics, and suddenly a jam the band had been carrying around for years had a permanent identity. But the part that makes it instantly recognizable arrives before any of those words matter. That opening guitar groove is pure motion. It is tight and percussive, almost like another part of the drum kit, but it never feels mechanical. Johnston's right hand creates the engine. The pauses between the chords are just as important as the chords themselves. And because the groove existed before the finished song did, the record feels as though it starts in the middle of something already moving. There is no long runway. The train is already running. That may be why the intro has lasted so well. It was not decoration placed in front of a finished composition. It was the oldest part of the composition. The riff existed when the words did not. The groove existed before the title did. The band had already tested it in front of real audiences long before the studio locked it onto tape. So when those first clipped guitar strokes hit, you are hearing the part that came first. And unlike the next song, that groove grew out of fun. Number 8 came came from anger. Number 8, Barracuda by Heart. Barracuda does not enter quietly. It charges in. The guitar lands with that galloping pulse, the tone bends, and the whole track sounds angry before Ann Wilson has sung a word. That anger was real. Heart was in a bitter dispute with their former label, Mushroom Records. The company had used a suggestive publicity image featuring sisters Ann and Nancy Wilson, which helped spread an ugly implication about the two of them. Then, after a show, a music industry man made a crude remark to Ann about her relationship with Nancy. Ann was furious. That incident became fuel for the lyrics that turned into Barracuda, but the famous riff had a different origin. Guitarist Roger Fisher and drummer Michael DeRosier had been fooling around during a sound check. Fisher later described it as the kind of musical free association that can appear for a few seconds and vanish forever. His brother, Michael Fisher, heard it and told him not to forget it. That accidental sound check idea and Ann Wilson's anger eventually met in the same song, and you can hear why they belong together. The riff does not merely support the emotion, it carries it. It keeps pushing forward, tense and aggressive, as if the song has already decided it won't back away from anything. Released in 1977 on Little Queen, Barracuda became one of Heart's defining recordings, but its identity is established before the vocal enters. You do not need the title announced. You do not need a chorus. The guitar does the introduction by itself. That is the difference between a good opening and an unforgettable one. A good opening prepares you for the song. An unforgettable opening becomes part of the song's name in your memory. If these intros are already taking you back, hit like and subscribe to When Music Mattered. We are only at number 8, and the openings become even harder to mistake from here. Number 7, More Than a Feeling by Boston. The polished sound of More Than a Feeling makes its origin almost hard to believe. Boston did not begin with a giant studio, a famous producer, and a room full of expensive equipment. Tom Scholz built much of that sound in a basement. Scholz was an MIT graduate working as an engineer at Polaroid. At night and on weekends, he wrote, recorded, rebuilt parts, experimented with equipment, and kept chasing the sound he could already hear in his head. The basement itself was not glamorous. Scholz has described a tiny space near a furnace, with homemade partitions and equipment squeezed wherever it would fit. He and singer Brad Delp spent years making demos while record companies repeatedly passed on them. Then those recordings finally opened the door, and More Than a Feeling shows the trick almost immediately. The beginning is gentle, the guitar feels private, almost fragile. It does not sound like an arena anthem yet. Then the arrangement starts opening outward. Electric guitars arrive, Delp's vocal rises. The record expands from something intimate into something huge. That contrast is one reason the intro is so recognizable. You hear the beginning, and if you know the song, your brain is already waiting for the explosion that follows. Scholz's engineering background mattered because Boston's sound depended on layers that still had to remain clear. He could stack guitars and vocals without letting the whole thing collapse into noise. And the opening works because it leaves enough empty space for that transformation to feel dramatic. It does not give you everything at once. It makes you anticipate what is coming. That is especially fitting for a song built around the power of musical memory. The arrangement performs the same trick on the listener. One guitar figure can make an entire record start playing in your head before the record itself gets there. That may be the greatest test of an intro, not whether you recognize the sound, whether the sound makes you hear everything that comes after it. At number 6, the opening feels even more futuristic, but the machine creating it was sold as a home organ. Number 6, Baba O'Riley by The Who. For decades, people have described the opening of Baba O'Riley as a synthesizer sequence. That is understandable. It sounds programmed, it sounds precise. It sounds like a machine generating a pattern too fast and too clean for human hands. But Pete Townshend created the core effect with a Lowrey home organ. Townshend later admitted that the trick was partly a workaround. He had not yet mastered the kind of sequencing he wanted on more advanced synthesizer equipment, so he used the Lowrey's marimba repeat function to imitate it. The limitation became the signature. That is a perfect 70s story. New technology was arriving quickly, but musicians were constantly finding ways to force existing tools into sounds they had never been designed to make. The title also carries two influences inside it. Herr Baba was Townsend's spiritual teacher. Terry Riley was an experimental composer whose repeating musical patterns had a major influence on him. Put the names together, and you get Baba O'Riley. The track also grew out of Townsend's ambitious Lifehouse project, which never came together in the form he originally imagined. But pieces of that project survived, and Baba O'Riley became the opening track on Who's Next. What an opening it is! Before Roger Daltrey enters, before Keith Moon crashes through the arrangement, before the song turns into full-force rock, that repeating organ pattern has already built a world. Then piano joins it, then guitar, then the band. Each layer makes the sequence feel bigger without destroying the identity of the original pulse. That's why the opening still feels unusual even now. The technology behind it is old, the method is known, the mystery is gone. The musical idea is still perfect. You hear that first ripple, and the rest of the song feels inevitable. At number 5, another keyboard becomes just as recognizable. This time, the machine matters less than the hands playing it. Number 5, Superstition by Stevie Wonder. Some intros identify a song with melody. Superstition identifies itself with touch. The clavinet's riff is so closely connected with Stevie Wonder that the instrument can seem as though it was made specifically for this record. It was not. Wonder simply made it sound like nobody else. The song began with rhythm. In a 2000 interview with NPR, Wonder remembered coming up with the idea while he was on tour with the Rolling Stones. He started at the drums, then came the clavinet, then the vocal melody. That order matters because the track was not built around a singer waiting for accompaniment. It grew outward from the groove. That is why the opening feels complete before the voice arrives. There is also the famous connection with guitarist Jeff Beck. Wonder and Beck had struck up a musical friendship, and Superstition was originally connected to that collaboration. Beck recorded his own version with Beck, Bogert, and Appice, but Motown recognized how strong Wonder's recording was and pushed for his version to come out first. The rest is history. But what makes the opening so powerful is not simply the notes, it is the way Wonder attacks them. The riff snaps, it breathes, it leaves holes. Every accent seems to answer the drums. That is why learning the notes is easier than reproducing the record. The identity lives in the feel. Released in 1972 on Talking Book, Superstition became one of the defining songs of Wonder's extraordinary creative run, and you do not need chart statistics to understand why it lasted. Play the opening and the recognition is almost physical. The groove arrives before the song has explained anything, and at number 4, 3 guitar chords became an equally powerful kind of shorthand. Number 4, Sweet Home Alabama by Lynyrd Skynyrd. There are guitar intros, and then there are guitar intros that become cultural shorthand. Sweet Home Alabama belongs in the second group. The opening picking pattern is bright, loose, and instantly familiar. Even before the full groove settles in, most listeners already know exactly what is coming. Gary Rossington, Ed King, and Ronnie Van Zant shared the writing credit. Rossington later remembered repeatedly playing the basic D-C-G picking figure at rehearsal, while King added fills and guitar parts that helped shape the finished record. What is remarkable is how relaxed it sounds. Nothing in those first seconds warns you that the lyrics are about to enter one of the most debated conversations in the band's history. The song was partly a response to Neil Young's Southern Man and Alabama, tracks that criticized racism in the American South. For years, that reference was framed as a bitter feud. The truth was more complicated. Gary Rossington later said the band loved Neil Young and described the line about him as more playful than hostile. That complexity followed the song for decades. The opening riff escaped all of it. It became bigger than the argument surrounding the words. And that is because the riff has a shape the brain grabs immediately. The most recognizable intros are often not the most complicated. They have a rhythm and a contour that can survive almost any setting. A guitar store, a bar band, a stadium, a film soundtrack, somebody casually picking up an acoustic guitar, a few notes, and everyone knows. Sweet Home Alabama has exactly that kind of opening. The guitar is not asking for attention. It sounds almost effortless. That may be part of why it became so permanent. The riff never feels as if it is trying to impress you. It simply appears, and the song is already there. At number 3, the guitar does the opposite. Instead of announcing itself, it whispers. Then it spends the next several minutes climbing. Number 3, Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin.
And she's buying the stairway to heaven.
Stairway to Heaven changes shape again and again, but nearly everyone remembers where it begins. Jimmy Page wanted the song to grow, not simply get louder, he wanted it to evolve. Page has explained that he had been experimenting on acoustic guitar and came up with different sections that he joined together. His plan was unusual. The drums would not arrive until later. The tempo would gradually increase. The entire track would build toward a huge climax. That plan makes the opening essential. If the ending is going to feel enormous, the beginning has to feel small. So the record starts with restraint. Page's picked guitar figure arrives almost alone. The notes are delicate and measured. There is none of the heavy riffing that had already made Led Zeppelin famous. And because the guitar is so exposed, every note matters. Page has also recalled that Robert Plant was writing lyrics while the band worked through the arrangement. The structure came first. That helps explain why the introduction carries so much identity without needing the vocal. It was designed to hold you by itself. Over the years, the opening became so familiar that it turned into a symbol of learning rock guitar. It was even used as a joke in Wayne's World, where trying to play Stairway in a guitar shop becomes something you are not supposed to do. A joke like that only works if everybody recognizes the reference. That is the point. A few quietly picked notes became famous enough to be parodied without explanation. There may be louder Zeppelin riffs, there may be heavier ones, but very few openings demonstrate contrast this well. You hear the first notes, and if you know the record, you remember the whole climb that is coming. Before we get to the final two, tell me in the comments which song on this list you recognize fastest the first time you heard it, and which opening do you think deserves number 1? Number 2, Hotel California by the Eagles.
On the dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair.
Before there was a hotel, there was a guitar progression. Don Felder was at home in Malibu, experimenting on a 12-string acoustic guitar when he found the sequence that would become Hotel California. He recorded an instrumental demo at home, adding guitar parts, bass, and a basic rhythm track. Then he sent that demo to the rest of the band. The 12-string introduction was already there. That matters. The opening wasn't decoration added after the song was written. It was part of the foundation. Don Henley and Glenn Frey heard something cinematic in Felder's music. The track carried the working title Mexican Reggae before the final concept and lyrics were completed. The Eagles kept developing the arrangement until the song became the recording we know now, and the 12-string intro became the doorway into everything that followed. Live, that intro created a practical problem. Felder needed a 12-string sound at the beginning, but he also needed a 6-string guitar for the later solo sections. Rather than keep changing instruments, he turned to the Gibson double neck that became closely associated with performances of the song. The top neck handled the 12-string introduction. The lower neck handled the 6-string parts. That tells you how central the opening had become. It could not simply be replaced by something easier. The audience expected that sound. The song needed that entrance. And it is a patient entrance. The guitar pattern circles while the harmony keeps moving underneath it. Nothing rushes toward the vocal. Instead, the music creates the sensation that you are traveling toward a place before anyone has told you where that place is. By the time the singing begins, the atmosphere already exists. The intro does not merely introduce the setting, it is the setting. But even Hotel California may not have the most instantly recognized guitar opening of the decade, because number 1 was born during one of the strangest recording trips in rock history. Number 1, Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. A few notes are enough. Smoke on the Water may be the ultimate example of an opening that became bigger than the record itself. And the strangest part is that Deep Purple did not initially treat the track like a future monument. The band went to Montreux, Switzerland in December 1971 to record the album that became Machine Head. The plan was to move into the Montreux casino once Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention had finished their show. During that show, someone in the audience fired a flare gun. The casino caught fire. Deep Purple watched the aftermath as smoke drifted across Lake Geneva. The disaster forced the band to scramble for another place to record. Out of that chaos came the song. Roger Glover has recalled that Ritchie Blackmore brought in the riff, and the band found a basic arrangement almost immediately. At first, it was essentially a jam. Glover later connected the word "smoke on the water" to what they had witnessed in Montreux. The lyrics became a surprisingly direct account of the strange circumstances surrounding the album, but none of that would have put this song at number 1 without Blackmore's riff. It is brutally simple. Not simple because it lacks imagination. Simple because almost nothing can be removed. The spaces are part of it. The rhythm is part of it. The shape is so clear that generations of beginner guitarists have used it as a first step into rock music, and Deep Purple nearly treated the track as an afterthought. Glover has said that when the album needed another song, the band remembered the jam they had recorded earlier and pulled it back out. Think about that. A band looking for one more track returns to a riff that will eventually become one of the universal symbols of the electric guitar. More than half a century later, the opening still works without context. You do not need the title. You do not need to see the band. You do not need the first lyric. The first notes are enough. That is what every song on this list has in common. The greatest openings do more than start records. They store memories. They turn a few seconds of sound into a time machine. If one of these songs brought back a person, a place, or a moment you had not thought about in years, tell me which one in the comments. And if you want more stories about the music that stayed with us long after the decade ended, subscribe to When Music Mattered, because the best songs do not need to be introduced. Sometimes they introduce themselves.